Welcome to our 7th episode of SARCan, Canada's Volunteer Search and Rescue podcast. For Volunteer SAR, about Volunteer SAR, by Volunteer SAR, and brought to you by Axiom Mutual Insurance, keeping promises close to home. My name is Patrick Armstrong, and with me as always is Spencer Whitelaw. How's it going, Spencer?
It's going great, Patrick, and might I say, thank you for breakfast this morning.
Well, it went well until you thanked your grandfather for paying, which happened to be me.
Again, we need to drill it home that you and I are drastically different generations, which becomes quite evident in this episode here.
Well, I don't know why you say that because tracking, which is the episode, is an old time skill. So you think I would be the one who has that.
I guess that's true, but I think it's a young man's game, and I think that tracking is making a comeback here with youngins like I wanting to spend time rolling around in the dirt.
That is true. That's why I sit in the command post. For our listeners out in central and eastern Ontario right now, I know that March is supposed to go out like a lamb. However, we hope that you are dry, safe, and we want to thank all the power crews that are out there trying to get the tens of thousands people without power their power back. So,
And if you need us through mutual aid, we will be there. SARCan is produced by Huron and Area Search and Rescue.
and as you may know, Spencer, April is Autism Awareness Month. We were speaking with Autism Ontario, and they gave us a little bit of a soundbite that I'd like to read. On April 2nd, Autism Ontario's Celebrate the Spectrum initiative brings communities together for World Autism Day, promoting advocacy, support, and inclusion for autistic individuals and their families. Celebrate the Spectrum is an opportunity for positive action, creating spaces of support and advocacy while learning about autism and how we can make our communities more inclusive for autistic people. Through local events, education, and advocacy, the initiative highlights the diverse experiences of the autism community. Autism Ontario continues to advocate for policies and services that would provide meaningful, lifelong support. This year, wear tie-dye to show your commitment to acceptance and inclusion. And for more information on events and how to get involved, please visit www.celeratethespectrum.com. And I highly recommend, and I don't know if you've ever seen it, Spencer, but the education through Search and Rescue Autism, or SARA as it's known. It's a great education program and knowledge base for search and rescue with persons on the spectrum.
Absolutely. And can we just acknowledge how professionally articulate that soundbite was? They made you sound like you knew what you were talking about, and that was great. And I love that. Celebrate the Spectrum. They've got a great slogan here, and we still need one for SARCan.
We do, and yes, they sent me the soundbite, which is why I sounded intelligent. On this episode, we have great SAR Spotlight with Yellowknife, and we're going to be talking with Brad from LSAR about your favorite subject, the young man's game, tracking.
Yay.
This episode's sponsor is Hey Communications. Hey Communication will provide progressive global communications and other technological services to all potential customers within our growing network reach with a superior degree of customer and employee satisfaction. And I can tell you, Spencer, Hey Communication are wonderful to deal with. They're wonderful to their community, and we really thank them for their sponsorship.
Absolutely. Thank you, Hey.
I'd like to welcome our listeners to our SAR Spotlight. I'm here with Brian McShane from Yellowknife Marine Rescue. How are you, Brian?
I'm doing all right. Thanks for having me. How are you doing today?
Good. So one thing we have in common, we are both Coast Guard auxiliary units. However, Lake Huron is a little different than your area. But let's start first with Brian. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Brian, I live up in Yellowknife, Northwest Territories. I've been calling that home for close to 25 years now. I live there with my wife and my 3 daughters, and I've been involved with the Coast Guard Auxiliary over 16 years. Just kind of rolled into that, called it the 17th year on the go right now. And we're getting ready for spring. It was like 28 below yesterday morning, but they say warm weather's coming. So somebody just saw the first bald eagle yesterday. And they say that's a sure sign of spring is coming. So bring it on.
So we have to look for groundhogs and you spot bald eagles.
Yeah, they got to be eating something. So
true.
Yeah.
So tell us a bit about Yellowknife Marine.
So Yellowknife Marine Rescue has been over 30 years in existence. Kind of a funny unit. We were originally a part of the Pacific Coast Guard Auxiliary, now RCM SAR. And then we got moved over into the Central and Arctic part of the Coast Guard Auxiliary. So it reset our lifespan. So we get our awards of 20 years of existence. Like we had another 12 years before that. So we've been around for a long time, since early, I think 92 we began. And we run around 40 members. I think we're going to be at like 43 members this summer. And we have 3 vessels in the water, and we'll run like a 24/7 on call for SAR, roughly the 1st of June until Thanksgiving. And both those dates are all dependent on ice conditions. When the ice is off the lake, we can put a boat in the water. And then our thing is to be able to get a boat up the boat ramp. So as soon as we're getting freezing temperatures or not going above freezing, I should say, that we can actually still get a truck on the boat ramp, then that's when the boats come out. And that's our season.
And tell us a little bit. 3 boats is great. Tell us about that.
We have a 1995 Zodiac Hurricane, 6.3 meter hurricane that has been refitted, has new sponsons on it, new engines, new electronics. We also have a Titan, a 26.5-foot Titan that we fundraised for and bought new in 2017. And in 2021, we picked up a Metalcraft, a 30-foot Metalcraft rib with a full house on it and a heater and a furnace and all the nice things, a little bit of, not the fancy seats, but suspension seats. And that's our workhorse. That's our kind of pride of the unit.
Well, I think you had me when you said it was heated.
Right? Like that's right where it's at. So
that's where I would be.
Cold all year round. It doesn't really get warm. We're over 2,000 feet deep in spots and 150 miles north-south, 250 miles east-west. And you go out in the middle of July. If you want to go camping out in the east arm of Great Slave Lake, you can just get your ice off the shore. You just go chisel it out, find a cave or a crevice. So we're dealing cold all the time, even though it's might be warm in Yellowknife. You get out in the lake with the cold, the ice, and everything. It's it just doesn't get warm.
Wow. Well, we certainly appreciate you coming on, and we want to make sure that we give a shout out to your unit at 40 members. So you must be a community unit then.
We are. Yep.
Yeah, we are as well. We definitely don't have that number, and our boats are a little bit older than what you've got there. But Brian, I can't thank you enough for coming on, and I want you to please be safe for you and your team.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us. And, if anybody's ever up in Yellowknife, make sure you look us up. We have a website, ykcga.com, and you can find our contact info. And if you're ever passing through Yellowknife, even in the wintertime, if you're coming to check the Aurora, if you're coming for the 24-hour daylight in the summer, we'd love to say hi, show you around, answer any questions about town. We've got a lot of people really passionate about living in the north. And, of course, we're all passionate about marine safety. So
we have a very special guest with us today on this, our 7th episode of SARCan. Welcome to the show, Brad Matushewski of London Search and Rescue, or LSAR. Brad has been a longtime friend of SAR, and he and LSAR were instrumental in helping SAR get up and running in late 2018. Brad is also a very experienced tracker, and I've had the pleasure of training with him in this art on a number of occasions. Welcome to the show, Brad.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, we're glad to have you, Brad. And why don't you share with our listeners a little bit about yourself and the roles you've held with London Search and Rescue over the years?
Yeah, for sure. So I joined London Search and Rescue, and after a period of time, I realized I wanted to, not just sort of learn from a team, but try to share my experience and knowledge with the team. So eventually I became the training officer, and then I moved forward into the planning chief role, which kind of works hand in hand with those two roles together to work out the training and strategic training goals for the team. And then my current role now is I'm the chief, or as we actually just changed our term to president. So I'm the president of the London Search and Rescue. If I may back up ever so slightly, many years ago, I spent some time in the Yukon, and I joined Search and Rescue up in the Yukon there as a ground search member.
Oh, wow. That would definitely a change from London being up in the Yukon.
Yeah, a little different up there.
I was wondering the same too, what the transition looks like from coming way up north to way down here.
Yeah, the transition, the biggest thing, it was kind of the early years as far as search and rescue from a volunteer perspective in Canada. Quite a bit different, and it was much more informal in terms of the training and in terms of how we conducted things. And at the time, I was actually looking specifically to join some sort of group to volunteer my time to give back to the community. And one of the things I was considering at the time was joining joining a scouting group because of my love for the outdoors and kind of wanted to share that with youth. But then when search and rescue came along, I'm like, yeah, this is a much better fit. I've had a lot of sort of experience from, I guess you can say, a rescue perspective. I used to work EMS, back in the day, so I had those strong ties and that propensity to do that kind of work. And what we match that with the love of the outdoors, it's a good pair for where I want to put my passion as far as volunteering goes.
Now, Brad, you and I have had the pleasure of taking our level 1 and 2 visual tracking certifications from Fernando Moriera, a world-renowned expert in the field. These training experiences will go down as some of my fondest memories thus far in my brief SAR career. How have you found that being trained in tracking has changed the way you conduct other roles in search and rescue? What did you find so appealing about tracking in general? And how has it changed your day-to-day outside of search and rescue?
Well, one of the biggest things that happens when you do a tracking course is you're going to be told that you're going to look at the world differently. You're going to move through the environment differently. You're going to pay attention to different things, and you're going to see things you would not have seen before. So as far as the day-to-day things, I'll kind of give an example. Before, you normally go for a hike down the trail and you're looking around and looking at the trees and the scenery and the sky, and once you become a bit more track aware, a bit more of your attention goes down to the ground. What can you see on the ground around you? And that sort of changes the aspect of it from there. As far as the search and rescue side of things, what does happen is because you have that track awareness, you have a different situational awareness about you in terms of when you're looking for a missing or lost person. And one of the biggest things is to become very keenly aware of track traps. So instead of maybe just walking through an area, before you enter it, you may see if that may hold a track that may be of relevance to the search.
Absolutely. I found that being trained in tracking, even just to a low level, has changed the way you conduct your role in being a part of a search and rescue team. You're much more aware of the very small clues, the smaller amounts of evidence that indicate a person being present. And really helps you open your mind to a lot more clues that are available out there when you're on a track. So that's phenomenal. What about tracking was appealing to you? Like, how did you progress from being a general search and rescue team member to getting into the specialty of tracking?
I think with tracking, there's a few personality attributes that are important, and attention to detail is one of them. And sort of the drive to want to practice and better yourself. If I were to use an analogy I like to often use, I should say, for tracking, I would tell people tracking is like teaching somebody how to do a free throw in basketball. I can teach you to do the free throw, but until you do a lot of practice, you're not any good at it. So although you did, quote, learn how to do a free throw, you're not particularly effective until you put some time into it. And tracking is very much like that. So in terms of me personally, I have that drive to want to be better and to work on their tracking skills on a regular basis. It is a skill that is perishable. So if you don't stick with it, it does fade over time.
Very good. What are some things that you do to practice when you're not on a live track? How are some ways that you can keep your skills sharp through the reps?
I do make a point to get out at least once or twice a week to do some purposeful tracking. One of the other things I did do is I created a sand pit in my backyard. And a sand pit is something that we can often use as trackers to study deformation of the substrate under different conditions. And the sand will emphasize or accentuate those changes. So you kind of learn how things work in the sands, and then you could apply that to real life where it's a bit less forgiving of a substrate. So in terms of why that becomes important when you're tracking, we're not just trying to follow the track. What we say is we have the track tell you a story. So what was the person doing? What were they thinking? Any sort of secondary actions that we're doing. So I'll give an example. Let's say somebody may be carrying something particularly heavy, like a backpack or something on one side. That's going to cause a change in the track that you can see on the grounds. And how does that apply to real life? Well, in real life tracking, what will happen is you don't always have your signature track at the beginning. You just know a person is missing, and you have no idea what shoes they're wearing or what kind of boots or anything about them. But if you know some detail about the missing person, like for example, it maybe comes to light that they were known to be carrying something, or they're seeing in a video somewhere carrying something. I look for those changes on a search to see if something will show up that may be connected to the missing person we're looking for. So learning how that track tells a story will help you connect the dots on a real life track.
The track most certainly does tell a story. I remember my first day of the level 1 training that you facilitated for us with Fernando. I thought it was witchcraft, to be quite frank. At the beginning, I thought there's no way that this is real. You can tell when somebody flicked a cigarette butt or looked over their shoulder, or you could tell their height and weight and all this stuff just by a couple of footprints. And then by the end of the 2-3 days of training, you come to realize this stuff is legit. And it really is a beautiful balance between art and science, if that doesn't sound too overly dramatic, in getting to learn how this functions. And it's a great skill. And I recommend that anybody take at least a level 1 course, anybody who's involved in search and rescue, because it does change the way you search. And like you said, getting that dirt time in and getting the more experience and training and practice in, the better you'll be as an overall searcher.
That's a really good point you brought up about how when you first look at it, it seems almost a bit like witchcraft. And that is something that over time that we've sort of developed a good rapport with our municipal police here, local municipal police, is that search managers may not be aware of what trackers can bring to the table, or they maybe sort of don't understand the skill set that they have and how it can contribute to a search. And maybe they think, oh, maybe it is sort of a little bit like witchcraft in a sense. But over time, developing that good relationship with the local search managers, they will you develop a trust between the two of you to integrate into the search and do what you need to do.
So, Brad, tracking goes so much beyond simply following footprints in the sand or snow. I know that we really try to hammer home you're not looking for the person or the body, you're looking for clues. And it is that science of clue detection, but on a micro scale. For our listeners who aren't familiar with how tracking works, walk us through exactly what you're looking for. And I know you touched on a little bit, but what are those things in the dirt, what you're focusing on above the surface level?
Yeah, for sure. So when you think about tracking, you kind of come to mind that you have an exact detail of what the footprint or the shoe track looks like, and you're following those at every step of the way. But in reality, you don't get that. So if you have nice perfect snow and you can see every step, then you don't need a tracker to follow those tracks. But what does happen is that is more to it than just the actual tread. You will have the overall general shape of the foot, the length, the width, whether the heel has a definitive curve or a flat edge, those sort of things that come into play. So you may not have a perfect tread pattern. Well, you won't have a perfect tread pattern every step of the way, but looking at something even like the relative shape of the track that you see on the ground can help you figure out where this person is going. So in terms of just soft ground, for example, if a person steps in some soft ground, you're not going to see any tread detail, but you'll see an overall impression in the ground. Looking at that, the next step is to then try to age it. And this is really the most important skill of tracking, is to age the track. Because you don't get a signature track every time, I'd like to say, you have to try to determine if the age of that track matches up with the missing person you're looking for. So is this track, a day old, a week old, a couple hours old? And again, it's about connecting all the dots to try to have some sort of conclusion in terms of what you're looking at, trying to decipher and interpret it. And that's a bit where the art comes in, is the art of interpreting all the information in some sort of logical and cohesive manner.
I remember fondly from our tracker training too that one of the things that you learn to do is even track blindfolded, which is a great confidence builder because you don't realize how much you rely on your eyes for tracking, obviously, until they're taken away. But also the other senses that are involved in tracking. We all know that dogs with their incredible noses can smell crushed vegetation, and that's how they follow people. But we can use our hands to literally feel the depressions in the ground and to be able to follow them where you don't even need your eyes to be able to do it. And those are for obviously your really experienced trackers who can just follow along a set of tracks faster than the person's even moving, which is quite impressive. Yeah, there's lots of skills that are involved in a lot of ways you can progress it. What about some clues that you would find that maybe don't lie on the surface? What about top sign?
So yeah, top sign we consider anything above ankle height. So that's quite a long range. So the bottom sign is down at the ground level. Top sign is something anything above ankle height. So the classic telltale sign is a broken branch. So someone walks through, snaps a branch, and that would be a top sign. There's also other indicators like broken spider webs, for example. And again, if someone goes through a spider web, it's broken, someone's passed there. But The reverse is even more important in some ways if you have a perfectly intact spider web, nobody's been through there recently. So sometimes the tracking part and even the top sign is about ruling out a direction of travel. So if I have all these options in front of me, I may start by trying to rule out directions of travel to try to hone in on a particular direction of travel, and then look for confirmation that supports the conclusion that this is the way the person went. At the end of the day, even if a tracker or a tracking team can determine which way a person left from point last known or direction of travel, that dramatically reduces the search area for the search managers from a planning perspective. So even that little bit of information at the beginning is tremendously helpful for search managers. But top sign involves a lot of things. Even say looser vegetation or grasses, as a person walks through, the vegetation folds back, they kind of interweave one another. The direction that is facing or folding indicates a direction of travel. So the vegetation kind of grows unencumbered or unentangled, but if it's interweaved, that chances are that something moved through that area. Now a top sign, it's a little bit trickier to rule if that is made by a person or made by an animal, but it is top sign, and then you look for your bottom sign and try to tie the two together so they concur with one another.
You bring up a good point when it comes to talking about ruling out areas because there is no sign. We traditionally think you're going to start from the first track and work your way, like you said, almost like a bloodhound walking across, following the track. But what about things like perimeter searches where you have trackers they're picking up something and then can leapfrog? Because I know that's been a discussion as well.
The term you're looking for, Patrick, is sign cutting.
Okay, so I am not tracker trained. I think we make that pretty clear. Although the idea of seeing Spencer blindfolded trying to feel his way through a field amuses me. Let's talk about sign cutting now that I know the terminology.
Yeah, so there's sort of two things you kind of touched on there. You talked about a perimeter cut, which involves sign cutting. So I was going to touch on that very briefly. So a perimeter cut is, let's say if you have an area, let's say it be a wooded area of some sort that's not overly large, that you could plausibly walk around it. A tracking team could go around that perimeter to see if there's any sign indicating a movement into that area or out of that area to help kind of create containment for that missing person. Sign cutting then is if you don't have a particular last known point and you're just searching for some sort of indication of sign. Sign cutting is I don't have any particular clues at the moment, but I'm going to look for some initiation of clues or some sort of line of clues or line of sign, as we'd say, to try to see if that is maybe a person that we're looking for. And there's a number of different drills you can do with that to sort of work on that. But again, the sign cutting is going from not having any clues or any sign to try to pick up that initial clue to start with.
What are some tips and tricks you picked up along the way that have helped you excel in this field? Perhaps maybe some tools that you rely on to help be an effective tracker?
So a really neat drill I kind of I started doing this past year is, again, I do have a dog, and I do take to the dog park sometimes. And what I'll do is I'll practice sign cutting in a dog park. And if you can imagine, the amount of prints and tracks in a dog park are immense, and they're very random. If you're on a track going down a trail, chances are the person's staying on the trail unless they have some reason to leave it. But in a dog park, a big open area, it's a free-for-all. People are moving in random directions. So one drill that I was doing this past year that was really quite effective is I would start with one particular track. I just say I'm going to start with this one. And then you start to create like a expanding circle spiral around that track. And every time you circle, you increase the diameter of that circle. And as you increase the diameter, you're trying to pick up that next line of sign from where that person is. And this way, you don't have any indication of what direction they're moving. But as you create that expanding circle, every time you come around, you try to pick up that same track again. And that was a really good drill because it's a real honest test of sign cutting. Because again, in an open area like that, the tracks are truly random, and you can't just sort of say, well, they're probably going down the trail. I'm sure I'll find something further down. It is complete random. So it's a really good sign cutting drill in a space like that.
Awesome. And I know when I first started to get into tracking, I'm not sure if our listeners are familiar with this, but I'm not a responsible credit card user and I like to buy stuff off Amazon. So when I put my tracking kit together, my Amazon cart looked very weird. It was like tweezers and spray paint and small mirrors and all this weird stuff. How are some of those trinkets, we'll call them, useful in a track?
So tools of trade, as we may say, one of the first and foremost things you want to get, I want a measuring tape that's rigid so that you can hold it across a track to take measurements. So as you have an initial track to work with, you want to get measurements on it. So we're going to need a measuring tape. The other thing that we found was really pretty effective was a green laser pointer, and that's in the instance when we're working a tracking team, because if we're working a team, we're trying to point something. It's not very easy to point with your fingers, but if I had a laser pointer, I could point to something in the ground a little further ahead, talk to fellow tracking team members. Hey, do you see that? That branch bent over that way, and see how that connects to this next line of sign here. You kind of create that line of sign, and even so far as looking across a field, you say, "Wow, I look across that field there, and I can see looks like something or someone entered the woods in that spot." And using that laser pointer is really helpful in communicating with team members. Compass obviously is something that's important. If we have a direction of travel, we want to get a bearing on it. And a couple other little tips and tricks, again, is to have a wide brim hat. And first of all, that will help keep some sun off your eyes so your eyes don't fatigue. But in the event that you are tracking during high sun, which incidentally is actually the most difficult time to track, the sun overhead, you don't have a lot of shadow depth of the shadows of things. And if you're looking at tracks, it's just shadows that you really see. So when light's low in the sky, that's when you see a bit more in terms of track detail. So in the event that you're tracking during high sun, you can also use your wide brim hat to cast a shadow over the track, and then you use a mirror to illuminate the track from the side using the sun. So those are some things if you want to see a bit more detail. So again, you use a hat to put a shadow on the track, and then illuminate it with a low angle light using the mirror to redirect that light into the track.
And we can't ever forget our trusty tracking stick, eh? I never thought, even though living in rural Ontario, I'm a city kid myself, but I never thought there would be a reason for me to buy castration rings. But for some reason, I've got hundreds of them. And it's your most important tool as a tracker is your tracking stick. And once you learn how to use it, you realize it makes your job a lot easier when it comes to tracking.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest, most important ones is that tracking stick. And what a tracking stick is, and essentially, is some sort of stick, which could be a telescopic walking stick or a series of 10 pole sections or what have you. Some stick that covers at least a stride length of a person. And what you end up doing is having some sort of rubber bands or O-rings, or in this case, castration rings, because they're a little bit thicker and they show up better, is you would mark kind of the heel and toe of one footprint or track, and then at the very least a heel and or toe of the next track. And what this gives you is a visual reference for the relative stride length of the person that you may be tracking. So if you have one last track that you can see, use a tracking stick to help guide your eyes to focus your attention on where you should be looking in terms of a stride length, approximately where that next track should be. So rather than having a lot of ground to search, it helps narrow that focus a little bit so that next track should be somewhere within this length here. So it really helps spotting the next step in the stride sequence based on a somewhat regular cadence of the person looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great tool to help narrow it down. I didn't realize getting into tracking just how much math is involved and how you got to take 8, 10 measurements just to get started. But it is what it is, and it's super helpful. How can tracking be utilized in urban search and rescue? What are some ways that you can still apply these tracking skills that you've acquired in a search that doesn't necessarily provide you with good terrain that leaves behind some decent sign?
Yeah, urban tracking is a whole other ballgame in a sense. And the principles are the same. It just means that your clues may be quite a bit further apart from one another. And this is where a tracking team can really shine because you just need more people to help with that tracking approach. So if I can relate to a story we had some time ago. This was there's a bit of snow on the ground at the time, and the person went missing, and the police had noticed or was track aware enough to find a pretty clean track in the snow. and they had put cones around it and protected it, and they called their tracking team in, and they waited for us to arrive to make sure this track wasn't disturbed. Now, although there is snow on the ground, there's not snow everywhere, and there's places where sidewalks get cleaned or salt gets put down in front of businesses, and we're trying to track this person through an urban environment. And this was, I think, probably about 3 in the morning when we started. In this instance, again, you use a bit of logic in your deduction reasoning here. This person with the dynamics of what we call lost person behavior is going to make probably some decisions about where they may intend to go or try to go. So you have that always in the back of your mind, and you work with the track. So if a person's walking down the sidewalk, there's really no reason to believe necessarily that they're going to be taking off into a backyard. They're trying to get somewhere. But as you go down the sidewalk, you have one person trying to look for a somewhat continuous line of sight on the presumption that the person is going to be traveling through sidewalks rather than hopping fences and backyards. You can send your tracking team up ahead to the next intersection, and so you've got 3 more members, each would take a direction, left, straight, and right, to look for some sort of confirmation sign along the way. Once they pick up that confirmation track, that's the next point. We all converge and then keep going from there. So this is where you kind of get into a leapfrog technique. So you have one tracker trying to work that step by step to stay on it. Then you send trackers ahead to try to pick up another track that's going in another direction change. So either they're staying straight or they're changing directions. And again, a tracking team in that instance helps you cover ground a lot more quickly. And even where there is the snow may be gone, there may be a little bits of here. Say in a season where there's not snow, I should say, even a little bit of dust or a little bit of gravel or a little bit of these little things here, there are track traps there. It's going to be just much more further apart.
One thing I want to get into really quick, you've got the training, you've got the knowledge, and you just talked about a case where you worked with the police. You've been very successful and have had some great success with live tracking and finding people. Like, it's not just the knowledge and the training, but you have the operational experience as well.
Yeah, and that one I was just talking about, we ended up tracking an individual about 5 kilometers to an urban environment, and we were at that point just happened to be by emergency operations center. We've been going for several hours at night, and they were open up. It's already about 8 o'clock in the morning, and they were open. So we stopped in there for a bathroom break, and we're about to continue on. And just as we were about to continue on, we came across information that the person was located. So by a London police officer. So, and again, in this instance here, we were on the person's track. This information where we were is being relayed and updated to the search managers the whole time, and they could start sending officers ahead. Like, okay, well, they're moving down the street. Let's send the car down that road, or what have you. And this person was found a few blocks away from our last point where we left off before we continued on again. So yeah, it was a good operational success that we have that information and intelligence feeding back to the search managers in real time, and they're making their decisions based on what we're finding.
That's excellent. I mean, it's obvious I don't have any skill sets in this, although I pride myself that I knew what leapfrogging was. And I definitely don't have some of the qualities you bring up, like attention to detail and patience. But what are some of those important traits and qualities that a good tracker should have? And if one of our listeners was wanting to get into tracking, how would you recommend they get started?
Well, with YouTube nowadays and whatnot, there are a lot of videos to check out, and certainly some of the people like Fran, I know, has a few videos out there and whatnot. If you can't get in the tracking course, that'd be next best bet. But one of the things that we really were cognizant of as a tracker, you really want to find that track, you really want to find something, but you have to be brutally honest with yourself. And if you don't see it, then you don't see it. Because while tracking can be very effective and a very powerful intelligence gathering for research, it can also be on the opposite direction, very detrimental. Because if you, as a tracker, think you see something and it's not what you think it is, you could potentially give information that directs a search in completely 180 degrees in the wrong direction. Again, you're providing intelligence to the search managers, and they're going to trust what you're saying. If you pick up the wrong track or you have an incorrect conclusion about what you're finding, you can single-handedly redirect things in the wrong direction, in the wrong direction here. So as a searcher, you really have to kind of check your ego, and if you see it, you see it. If you don't, you don't. You have to be quite honest. And again, you're so driven. You really want to find that track. You really want to see that next thing, and you really want to provide that information. But you have to be be honest with yourself. And this is also too, when you work in a tracking team, we talk to our fellow trackers, and we say, hey, are you seeing this? Or do you agree with that? We can kind of check in on one another to have a bit of a discussion about what we're seeing to make sure that we're kind of on agreement that, yeah, this looks legitimate.
Talk about pressure, where your belief and relying on your training, which again, sometimes I think is just pure witchcraft, even though I know better now, can single-handedly redirect the direction of an entire search and could potentially put the whole search, the success of the search in jeopardy, or at best set it back a few hours. Perhaps that is amount of a whole lot of pressure. So I think that's probably a good trait you should be able to have as a tracker as well, is to be able to work under pressure. Finally, Brad, why don't you tell our listeners and Patrick and I why you chose to volunteer in search and rescue, and what has kept you involved in SAR for so many years?
Well, this comes down to a bit of a personal philosophy of mine, and the philosophy is such that I've always truly believed if you are have a unique ability to help somebody, you have an obligation to help somebody. And I guess as far as my unique or rare, say, what's not unique, maybe a rare, not everybody's going to have it. I have a propensity for the outdoors, and with the medical background, I have the ability and the skill and the endurance and stamina to go look for people at any time of day, any time of night, any kind of weather conditions at the drop of a dime. And not everybody's willing to do that. I have that, drive to want to help and give back to the community. As far as what keeps me going in SAR, it's that very philosophy of wanting to give back to the community. So the biggest passion is truly helping somebody. You sort of feel like sometimes you're in the best position to give the person the best possible chance to being reunited with their loved ones in one way, shape, or form or another.
Awesome. And I do have one last question for you, Brad. What does the future of tracking look like for you? Is it kind of a dying art because it is an old skill, or are we going strong where we're getting new trackers trained up and people still have the same passion and drive for it like yourself?
That's a good question, and it is an old skill. It's been around for a long time, and it's something that I'd really like to see develop. Not just our team, but other search teams, to get people that, at the very least, that track awareness, and maybe get a few people that kind of catch a bug that really want to develop it on their own. It really is something that a person needs to work on their own. You can't teach all the things you need to learn. You have to kind of experience it on your own.
On behalf of SARCan, we really appreciate this. I know I have learned a lot. Spencer tries to tell me tracking stuff all the time, and I tend to tune him out, but I found you quite interesting, Mr. President, with your knowledge, and I know the operational successes that you and LSAR have had with that. So on behalf of SARCan, thank you so much for your time today.
All right, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
And Brad, thank you for what you and LSAR and all your tracking team do to help find lost persons and bring them home. In the meantime, stay on track.
Likewise, you too.
Another great episode, and as part of our series, These Are the People in the Neighborhood, where we do a spotlight on somebody who works through Volunteer SAR throughout Canada. This one's a bit of a sad note, Spencer, because we're talking about Neil Brewer, a true hero of British Columbia's search and rescue community, who passed away after 35 years of service to Kent Harrison SAR and rescue teams across the province. He joined in 1990, quickly a pivotal force in emergency response. Became a SAR manager in 1991. Some of his achievements: secured SAR initiatives, led complex searches, including an 8-day mission for a missing boy near Prince George in 2002, developed critical communication systems for SAR teams across BC, and was instrumental in securing over $10 million in provincial funding for SAR groups. So we want to give a shout out for Neil, and we certainly give our condolences not only to his family, but to his friends and the SAR community.
Amazing. I mean, 35 years is phenomenal. Thank you for listening to SARCan, Canada's Volunteer Search and Rescue podcast, brought to you by Axiom Mutual Insurance, keeping promises close to home. SARCan is pre-recorded and produced by the Huron and Area Search and Rescue and edited by Bad Puppy Productions.
SARCan is driven by your suggestions and comments, so please, if you have an idea for a topic, want to highlight your SAR unit, or give a shout out to a member of your team, contact us at sarcan@hazar.ca.
SARCan, for Volunteer SAR, about Volunteer SAR, and by Volunteer SAR. On behalf of Patrick and I, thank you for joining in on yet another episode of SARCan, and thank you to all the volunteers out there, everything you do for your communities. Please be safe.
Absolutely. And I'm still on the search for our end quote. So I'm going to leave this one with the infamous and wonderful Winnie the Pooh. How lucky I am to have something that makes saying goodbye so hard. On behalf of Spencer and I, be safe and thank you.